Welcome to the next session of my talk on the role of ethics in life sciences. In the last section, we discussed about the various ethical theories and principles that help us and guide us in taking decisions when faced with issues in life sciences. In this section, I would now focus on some very important and relevant debates around new technologies in life sciences. These technologies, on one hand, promise cure to certain critical diseases and also promises a better life. But on the other hand, there are serious ethical and moral questions around them. The first example that I would be discussing is about euthanasia. So, euthanasia is defined as facilitating death of critically ill patients who have no chances of recovery by medical professionals. It could be passive euthanasia or active euthanasia. Passive euthanasia refers to the condition when there's a withdrawal of life support system, such as a critically ill patient who is totally dependent on the life support system and has no chance of recovery. When this life support system is withdrawn from that patient, that refers to passive euthanasia. Whereas active euthanasia is when death is induced by drugs or other means. Euthanasia could be either voluntary, that means that the patient makes the decision, and involuntary, when someone else makes the decision for the patient. Involuntary euthanasia is usually when the patient is in no condition or is not competent enough to take the decision for himself. So nowadays, the debates around euthanasia has intensified in the Western countries. What are the reasons for this? The main reason for this is that with the technologically advancement, a terminally ill patient can be kept alive for a very long duration, for 10 years, for 20 years. So there are times that the critically ill patient might recover, but many a time this extending just means the extending of suffering in the patient. And at times the patients are forced to live in a disabled condition and they live a life of indignity. Let us now look at the case of Aruna Schönborg. Many of you must be familiar with her. Aruna was working as a nurse in King Edward Memorial Hospital at Pune, at Parel, Mumbai. During her duty hours, she was once assaulted and sodomized by a sweeper. And during this process, he wrapped a dog chain around her neck. This led to the stoppage of oxygen supply to her brain, which resulted in the brain stem contusion, cervical cord injury, and cortical blindness. She was reduced to a vegetative state. Now, this incident happened in 1973, and she remained in this state for the next 40 years. So, in 2009, journalist and human rights activist Pinky Virani had filed a euthanasia petition on behalf of Aruna Schönborg, claiming to be her friend. The Supreme Court, however, rejected this plea on the ground that Aruna was not brain dead and she did react to some situations on her own. For example, when she heard some devotional music, she showed happiness. When she had to defecate, she gave signals. So the Supreme Court said that since she was not brain dead, hence euthanasia cannot be performed on her. Finally, Aruna died in 2015 due to pneumonia. So now people who support euthanasia says that it is ethical because it helps the patient to die in a condition of dignity. It helps in relieving the pain and suffering of the patient. Also, in many conditions, when the patient is kept in a life support system, it is a heavy financial and emotional burden for the family. So euthanasia relieves the mental and financial burden for the family. Another very important reason given for euthanasia is that the life support system could be used, or the resources, medical resources could be used for other patients, especially in countries like India, where resources are very limited. So these resources could be used for patients who have a chance of recovery. And of course, there's the question of the autonomy of the patient. Autonomy meaning that the patient has the right to choose a life with dignity. However, those against it say that it devalues the basic concept of the respect for human life. So it is against the natural law ethic principle, which says that decision should be taken keeping in mind the natural good. It contradicts the duty of physicians to save life. So according to the Hippocratic Oath, medical doctors are responsible to treat terminally ill patients and to mitigate their suffering while allowing them to die. It also holds that an essential qualification of being a medical doctor is an absolute rejection of killing of the patient. So now I would like you to take a minute and think upon these two sides of the coin and think which according to you is correct. Public opinion polls show that euthanasia is favored in some countries. In USA, almost 67% of the population favored it, while in Australia, 76% are in favor of euthanasia, Canada, 77% are in favor, and in UK, 82% are in favor of euthanasia. In fact, Scottish psychologist John Beloff argues that if we conceive of the right to die as being like most other rights, like the right to property or right to education or right to travel, then we should, as in all other cases, have a right to die and be able to call upon the resources of the community to help us fulfill that right. Jack Kevorkian, the US pathologist, certainly thinks that an individual has a right to die and has assisted individuals with death to the point that he is willing to go to the prison to highlight this right. As far as the legal scenario is concerned, Netherlands was the first European country to legalize euthanasia and assisted suicide. In Netherlands, the practice is regulated by the Termination of Life on Request and Assisted Suicide Act of 2002. In the Northern Territory of Australia also had legalized euthanasia in 1996, but a subsequent legislation that is known as the Euthanasia Laws Act in 1997 illegalized it by repealing the former judgment. As of March 2018, active human euthanasia is legalized in Netherlands, Belgium, Colombia, Luxembourg, Western Australia, and Canada. In India, passive euthanasia by withdrawing life support to patients who are in a permanent vegetative state is allowed. So now I come to the next technology or next issue in life sciences, that is research in embryonic stem cells. This is one area that excites scientists and researchers as well as the general public in all places. So I will begin by giving a brief discussion about what are stem cells. So so in general, our body has cells, and these cells, after a certain point of time, differentiate into particular cell type, meaning some would become the liver cell, some would become the muscle cell, and these are all different from each other. But then there are certain cells which are known as stem cells. Now, these stem cells have the unlimited capacity to divide. So stem cells can keep on dividing, and they can also differentiate in different cell types. So in general, what happens is if a liver cell divides, it gives rise to liver cell. If a muscle cell divides, it gives rise to muscle cells. But stem cells, given particular condition, can differentiate into different type of cells. Now, the embryonic stem cells are basically stem cells which are found in the embryo. So this is a human blastocyst that you see here, and there's an inner cell mass. Now, these cell mass give us what we know as the embryonic stem cells, and these embryonic stem cells can differentiate into different cell types such as blood cells, neurons, pancreatic cells, and any other cell types. Now, this is highly exciting because theoretically, supposingly we have some problem with certain neurons in our brain. So what we can do is we can take some embryonic stem cells, make them differentiate into the neurons and put them back in the brain so that we get a cure for it. However, nature is messy and we really do not know how these stem cells will behave once they are inside the body. Now, there are various sources of embryonic stem cells. So in the process, when in vitro fertilization takes place, there are many embryos that are created. So the extra embryos could be used for extracting the stem cells. Also, in case of abortion, in case of miscarriages, the embryonic stem cells can be obtained from the fetus. There's also a new technology that can convert the adult cells, like any cells, like a cell from the skin. It can be converted into an embryonic stem cell, meaning the cell from the skin can now become any other cell type. So that is a new technology that is known as reprogramming of adult cells. And then there is the process of nuclear transfer. In this nuclear transfer, what we do is we create an embryo by transferring the nucleus of a somatic cells. Somatic cells meaning cells from skin, from breast, from any other part of the body into an egg cell. So we take the egg cell from a female and we transfer the nucleus of a somatic cell into that egg cell. Now this egg cell would now differentiate and would divide and become a blastocyst or an embryo. The same technology is used in cloning. So now from the created blastocyst, the embryonic stem cells can be extracted. So this actually seems like a very exciting field for a lot of cure. So we all know Christopher Reeve as Superman. He played Superman in 4 films. However, he was later paralyzed due to a spinal injury in a riding accident. And so as an example, in his case, if stem cells could have been used, he could have been cured. That is the theoretical assumption. So before dying in 1995, he tirelessly campaigned for stem cell research, which he believed was a hope for people like him. So those people who advocate the stem cell research argue that this research has the potential cure to a number of life-threatening conditions such as Alzheimer's and diabetes, where these cells can replace the faulty cells and tissues. Although there are many ethical issues around this, I would just stick to one of them. And the one that I am talking about is it ethical to kill a blastocyst? Is the blastocyst alive? Is it a human life we are talking about? So we are basically questioning the moral status of an embryo. If we consider the utilitarian principle, then stem cell research can be considered as ethical as it would cure people, so the consequences are good. However, the problem is nature, as I told you, is messy, is unpredictable. We don't really know the consequences till the experiment is actually carried out. How well this would work is unknown. So in this case, the consequence is unknown and hence it becomes difficult to take a decision. Now, if we consider the deontological view, it is our duty to respect life. But whose life are we talking about in this case? The patient who requires the stem cell or the embryo, if we consider the embryo to be having life? So we return back to the same question, that when does life start? Now, this question has different answers. According to the Roman Catholic view, which was reinforced by Vatican in 2018, life starts at conception. Other traditions like Islam, Hinduism, Judaism may have other answers to this. Hence, this is a classical case of cultural relativism. The next example that I would like to discuss with you is an issue that is related to environmental ethics. So GM crops are genetically modified crops. In this, through genetic engineering, desired genes are inserted in particular plants. So for example, we may insert the genes for making it resistant to pest, or for making it more enriched for a particular nutrient. So these are some, or for a particular vitamin. So we can insert genes in a particular plant and make transgenic plants. These genes that are inserted can be from the bacteria, it can be from other plants, or even human. For example, in BT cotton, the genes inserted made them resistant to pest. Similarly, there are other such crops. One of them that I would be discussing right now is known as golden rice. So in 1999, Swiss and German scientists were able to produce a transgenic variety of rice, which they termed as golden rice because of the color. The color was yellowish. This was because 2 genes of daffodil was inserted in it, along with 1 gene from a bacteria. Now, this rice could produce beta carotene that could transform into vitamin A in our body. This was supposed to be a game changer for children of the developing countries who became blind due to vitamin A deficiency. It is estimated that around 500,000 children suffer from blindness due to vitamin A deficiency. However, along with issues of biosafety, many ethical issues were raised. Greenpeace argued that there was not enough vitamin A in golden rice. Moreover, was it ethically correct to use the developing countries as guinea pigs? In Europe, as we know, that GM crop is banned, and hence these companies that produce transgenic crop usually push this into the third world countries or the developing countries. Most of the time, these are not even labeled as GM crop. Hence, in this case, we are not respecting the choice of the consumers. So far, no research or tests have been done to indicate what human health effects would occur if people ate large amounts of this GM crop. It could be deemed inhuman to mass produce a crop without knowing its full implication, possibly putting millions of people at risk. Greenpeace has been advocating that having a nation dependent on one staple industrial food rather than a multiple source of vitamin A is a risk for both the country's welfare as well as for the economics. They believe that there are better and cheaper and more sustainable solutions for environments that come with risk-free benefits. I would like to point out here that similar kind of rice, indigenous rice, is found in southern part of India. However, people do not prefer eating it because people generally have a preference for pearly white rice. So instead of pushing these kind of GM crop, it is better that there is more awareness around food products, and also even if they are in the market, the better way of introducing it would be by labeling it as GM crops. There's also concern raised that GM crops change the livelihood of small and indigenous farmers because most of these crops do not have seeds that can be used. The seeds cannot be used for the next harvest. So the farmers become totally dependent upon the companies to buy more seeds at whatever price they charge. So these are some of the issues around the GM crop. The next issue that I would like to talk about is xenotransplantation. So xenotransplantation is basically the transplantation of animal organ to human beings. Now, as soon as I say this, the picture of David Bennett comes to our mind, who I think around 2 months before, who received a pig's heart. So for this, the almost 10 genes of the pigs were manipulated, modified, so that the heart would not be rejected. So this is an example where the organ was customized for the patient. Now, xenotransplantation has many ethical issues, including animal rights, distributive justice, and allocation of resources. First and foremost, all religions preach respect for all forms of life. So it is not that we only have to respect human life, we also need to respect other forms of life. And as David Rothman very popularly stated, that when we respect one form of life, that usually projects to other forms of life also. In fact, various scientists have also pointed out that the higher mammals feel just like human beings, feel pain, they feel fear just like human beings. Jane Goodall, who did a lot of study on primates, said that it was non-ethical, it was not ethical to use primates for human experimentation, because primates have emotional depth, they also show altruistic behavior. Another question, another ethical question that is raised is, do humans have the right to raise another animal for their medical purposes? And is it actually ethical to raise large mammals just as spare parts for humans? So this basically is a kind of disrespect which is shown to other life forms. In fact, deep ecologists also say that disrespect to other life forms have created ecological imbalance and affected life on this planet. So along with these ethical issues around the animal rights, there are also issues that xenotransplantation is a costly procedure. So how would it be ensured that allocation of organ is done in a fair method? So only the very rich people would be able to be benefited by this xenotransplantation. Another question that is often asked is, why should the government spend so much money on such a costly procedure that would benefit only a few people, when even the basic medical treatment is not available for a large population in many countries? Recently, many new concerns have also been raised. One of them is that xenotransplantation increases the risk of virus and other pathogens to enter along with the organ into the human body. So these might lead to another pandemic. So in this respect, the xenotransplantation might risk the entire population. So as Clark said very famously, that xenotransplantation is a unique medical enterprise. It puts the public at risk, and it has to be the public that says, I do not accept that risk, or I do accept the risk. So here, the stakeholder is not just the researchers, the clinicians, and the patient. There is the public also, who are a major stakeholder. So now I come to the Human Genome Project. So the Human Genome Project was the largest international scientific research conducted in the field of biology. This research project began in 1990, and the mission was to discover all the genes and the sequences that are present in human DNA. The Human Genome Project was coordinated by the Department of Energy and the National Institute of Health in the USA. So the outcome of this was that it would enable improved diagnosis of diseases, rational drug design, creation of customized drug, and gene therapy. So there were several benefits of Human Genome Project in the context of molecular medicine and biomedical research. The maps created by the Human Genome Project have enabled researchers to identify many genetic conditions, such as the colon cancer, such as breast cancer, such as Alzheimer's disease. So the Human Genome Project will enable also, it can be used in the forensics, because a large database has been created where all the sequences could be kept, and whenever there is a crime, they can be matched. Also, it would help in identification of the parents and other relationship. So there were a lot of advantages or benefits that was envisioned from the Human Genome Project. However, there were many ethical issues also raised. So one of the major ethical issues was that if the data is in public domain and anyone can access it, then that means that it can be misused also. For example, potential employers can access this information while making the decision whom to hire. So there might be people who have a genetic disorder, yet they might be physically fit and capable of working. Nevertheless, the employers might decide not to hire them, considering the possibility of them developing a medical disorder in future. Also, the insurance companies can earn profit. Say that there are certain genes that predisposes a person to cancer. So once the insurance professions come to know of it, they would ask these people to pay a higher premium. So these are instances of discrimination that could be based on genetic information. Also, the minority ethnic groups can be discriminated against. So the Universal Declaration of Human Rights and Human Genome states that no one shall be subjected to discrimination based on genetic characteristic that is intended to infringe or has the effect of infringing human rights, fundamental freedom, and human dignity. Another very interesting and I would say a very another thing that has far-reaching impact is the fact that the Human Genome Project have enabled the scientists and doctors to replace cells in unborn children. So this implies that parents can have custom-made babies with the desired features. A possible dilemma is issues related to in vitro fertilization. So in case of in vitro fertilization, there are many embryos that are available. So since the genetic information is there, one can select the embryos with desired trait or high grade embryos. So this brings about the concept of designer baby. So next I come to certain ethical issues related to public health. So one of them is the vaccination program. So now the ethical dilemma in vaccination program lies in the choice between autonomy, wherein the public is free to decide what they want, versus protection of at-risk patient. So as we saw in COVID also, there were many people who did not want to be vaccinated. So according to the utilitarian theory, since vaccination is beneficial to majority of people, it is ethical. Hence, there could be conflicts between the different principles. Hence, to minimize these conflicts, one can conflicts among the relevant ethical principles. More awareness should be created about a particular vaccine, also about preventable diseases. The public understanding of herd immunity should be increased, and the safety concerns of parents or guardians should be addressed. So another very relevant issue that came up during COVID-19 was ethical issues in the public health system, healthcare system. So there's this paper by Cooley et al. which says that during COVID-19, there was a scarcity of resources. So many of us faced this in Delhi. So there was a scarcity of resources, and they found out that due to the scarcity of resources, there was suspension of emergencies and elective surgery treatments, which generated an increase in the number of deaths. Also, there was a dilemma that was faced by doctors about retaining the life support for critical patients. Many hospitals as well as healthcare workers, they refused to treat the patients because they were concerned about their own health. So can it be said that during such a situation, during a situation of pandemic, normally unethical solutions become ethical? It seems that this is not the case, because it has been said that even when once pandemic situation, even if there during pandemic situation there is a risk to health workers, it is widely accepted that health workers have a responsibility to provide for patients. Also, with different degree of intensity, guidelines for professional ethics insisted on the importance of providing services during pandemic. Thus, we conclude that the observed negative behaviors adopted by some medical practitioners during COVID-19 could be assimilated as unethical behavior. So this was the observation by Cooley et al. So even in challenging situations, the medical practitioners would require to uphold the fundamental principles of medical ethics, such as non-maleficence, justice, autonomy, and beneficence. So another very dynamic field is reproductive medicine, which deals with achieving pregnancy on one hand, and on the other hand, it also helps in avoiding unwanted pregnancy. So in this case also there are many ethical issues, but I would confine myself to just one or two issues. So one of them is the pre-implantation genetic diagnosis, which is done during in vitro fertilization. So this is basically what is done is that during in vitro fertilization, once the embryo is formed, so we can actually look at the genetic makeup of the embryo to decide whether they are carrying some kind of abnormalities or some kind of problems, and then only they are implanted. So that is why it is known as pre-implantation genetic diagnosis. In this process, this can, but however, this PGD is often used for sex selection. Now, this can be achieved by selecting only the embryo of a particular sex, because we know the genetic makeup. So whether it is an X, because we know the genetic makeup, so it is very easy to say whether it is an XX embryo, that is a female embryo, or a XY embryo, that is a male embryo. So one can basically choose the sex of the embryo and then implant it in the uterus. So there is also a scope of selection of embryo with particular genetic makeup leading to designer babies. One can argue in this case that a person should have the freedom or autonomy to choose the sex of the child or embryo with specific traits. Also, it is argued that PGD helps in avoiding termination of pregnancy, which is very prevalent in countries like India. So once the sex of the child is known, the child is usually killed if it is a female child. So PGD can prevent this, because only the male child is put in the uterus for implanted in the uterus. However, this sex selection is a clear case of discrimination based on gender. Also, it may further skew the sex ratio and create problems for future, as is the case in some Indian states such as Haryana. So at present, sex selection in artificial reproductive technology is legal in United States, but is prohibited in Canada and several European countries. In Israel, it is permitted in rare cases with approval. The other reproductive issue that has many ethical viewpoints is surrogacy. So surrogacy is basically a type of artificial assisted reproductive technology in which the surrogate mother carry the fetus of another woman or a couple. So surrogacy could be either traditional surrogacy or it could be gestational surrogacy. Traditional surrogacy is when the surrogate provides the oocyte as well as the uterus. So here the surrogate is providing not only the uterus for the embryo, but it is the surrogate's oocyte which is used in the in vitro fertilization. And gestational surrogacy is when the surrogate mother is just providing the uterus. So here the biological parents would provide the oocyte and the sperm. These two are fertilized outside the body, and then the embryo is placed in the body in the womb of the surrogate mother. So there are many ethical issues around commercial surrogacy. We all know that pregnancy is a demanding process. The surrogate invests her time and her health in pregnancy. And also there might be many risks to her life in cases of complication. Hence, it is but natural that she should be compensated. However, those against commercialization argue that because of this incentive of money, it many times entices poor women who risk their life in lieu of the money. Also, the feminists argue that surrogacy and commercialization of surrogacy is basically a commodification of a body, because here the body is being sold as a commodity. So in this case, the informed consent of the surrogate is a must. And also there should be proper counseling of both the surrogate as well as the biological parent. Also, a legal agreement is a must that documents the role and the responsibility of the surrogate and the biological parents. In some cases, the family members are preferred as surrogates to reduce the cost. However, this has its own set of ethical issues. The principle of autonomy in this case is often compromised due to pressure by family members. Moreover, if there is any harm to the baby or the baby is born with any kind of defects, then the family members blame the surrogate mother. Also, there's a question of detachment of the surrogate mother with the child, because in a family scenario, these as relatives, they might keep on meeting with each other. Now, as far as the legal aspects of surrogacy is concerned, in India, the practice of commercial surrogacy was legalized in the year 2002. This practice was basically to promote medical tourism, and soon India became the hub of surrogacy. The reason for this was the low cost of the procedure and absence of any strict legislations regulating it. However, this unregulated business of surrogacy raised concerns like unethical practices, exploitations of the surrogate mothers, abandonment of children born out of surrogacy, etc. So in 2008, a surrogacy case came up, which is known as the baby Manji case. In this case, the baby who was conceived through surrogacy was named as Manji. The surrogate was commissioned by a Japanese couple. However, during the process of pregnancy, the Japanese couple got separated. Now, the father was barred from taking custody of the child because, according to the Indian law, single men cannot take the custody of a girl child. And the Japanese law did not recognize surrogacy. So all these made the government aware, made the people aware, and the need was seen for stricter regulations. So the Surrogacy Bill of 2019 was adopted to incorporate changes that aimed at banning commercial surrogacy in India. And now only altruistic surrogacy was allowed. So the bill says that only that bill does not allow LGBTQK plus families or single parents, unmarried couples, foreign citizens, and people outside the age group of 23 to 50 for females and 26 to 55 for men to seek surrogacy. Now, when the term altruistic surrogacy came up, it said that only close relative can be surrogate. But however, the bill did not specify or define close relatives. Later on, another bill was passed in the year 2021, which is known as the Assisted Reproductive Technology Bill. So from all these examples, we actually realize the crucial role of ethics in life sciences. Now, since it is so important, there should be training courses in research ethics because it might significantly promote ethical conduct. Many a times, researchers are not aware of ethics and end up with ethical misconduct. The training courses can help the researchers grapple with ethical dilemmas by introducing researchers to important concepts, tools, principles, and methods that are useful when faced with confusing situations. Ethical misconduct in life sciences can have serious consequences. So now the question is, can ethics be learned? The answer is yes, because ethics is not about intuitions, nor is it an inherent sense of right or wrong. We have all seen small children are born without ethics, but as they grow older, they slowly learn what is right and what is wrong from their peers or from their parents or from other elders in the family. This is evident in their behavior because as they grow old, they would usually not hurt other children or they would learn about sharing their things with friends. Similarly, as adults also, we continuously learn ethical values and incorporate them in our daily lives. For example, we learn not to discriminate among people, to be more sensitive to people with special needs, and many more. So, the ultimate goal of research in life sciences is to promote scientific knowledge as well as to protect participants. These two goals are not exclusive but are interdependent upon each other. One has to remember that trustworthy data can only be obtained when participants are treated ethically. I hope I have been able to pique your interest in this very important and relevant discussion, which has become very important in the field of life science. Thank you so much for a patient here.